What's up, everyone? It's the Autistic Scyther here, and this is part 3 of black characters in video games. Well, so to speak. Those that don't know, the first 2 parts of this series are up on my channel, so I suggest you watch those first, then come back to this one for the next group of black characters. And of course, we're taking a look at one of my favorite genres of video games, role-playing games. However, that being said, before we start that, I might as well I gotta mention about characters from a game that most people will tend to think of in terms of, most people won't think of as a fighting game, but are in the same ballpark. Punch-Out. And honestly, that being said, Punch-Out is really interesting as, considering that they have only 3 characters in this one, and every character is basically a stereotype of where they're from. And no, Nick and Rick Brewster from Super Punch-Out aren't black. But in fairness, yeah. They actually have 3 characters that are seen as black, which really does say a lot. The first one that many players who have played the Punch-Out franchise were possibly introduced to is, of course, the character of, is actually Mike Tyson, thanks to Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. But, of course, that being said, yeah, honestly, even afterwards, considering Mike Tyson is based on the actual boxer, yeah, the first original one is Mr. Sandman. And honestly, either way, he's seen as a big dude. And also a penultimate boxer before the final match. So, really does say a lot. Or the final boxer if we go with Punch-Out for the Wii. In the first one. That being said, yeah. He's basically interesting since he's more or less from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And according to Punch-Out Wiki, it's kind of based on the whole thing about how people from Philly are more or less aggressive. Which, basically considering he's a black guy from Philly, from the projects. Granted, considering where I'm from, Philly is a good amount away, but his stereotype is not always limited to Philly, but limited to many other places. I mean, heck, my home state of New Jersey basically has 2 places where that is more or less notable, being Plainfield and Newark. That being said, he's not the only one that shows up, as in Super Punch-Out, we are also introduced to, 2 more characters being, Bob Charlie, a boxer from Jamaica, who is basically the stereotype of the laid-back Jamaican, and named after famous reggae artist Bob Marley, and of course Piston Hurricane, who is a pretty solid Afro-Cuban representation, even though he's named as such due to the stereotype that Cuba is always hit by hurricanes, according to Punch-Out Wiki. But, yeah. Then again, he also might be named after famous boxer Reuben Hurricane Carter, But then again, we don't really know exactly what he was named after. And finally, we of course have Disco Kid, who is basically a disco-loving boxer, basically from Brooklyn, New York, just a borough away from Little Mac's hometown of the Bronx. And yeah, by the time of the title defense and fight, he basically ends up swapping out boxing for jazzercise, or as he calls it, boxercise. And so, yeah, it's kind of neat when you think about it. Now that we got those 4 Punch-Out characters out of the way, I forgot to it was 4, not 3. Let's move on to the RPG. Let's move on to RPGs. And oh boy, am I gonna be gushing. Because I have played... Role-playing games have been a genre of games I've played for almost all my life. And one such game I've played the most has got to be the Fire Emblem franchise. And in fairness, unlike a certain other franchise who has had black characters from the start, they had a kind of interesting start in terms of black characters, as the first black character was introduced in Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, that being the character of Devdan. And yeah, he's kind of not a great start in terms of black representation. As well, in not only his conversation with Ike, as well as the fact of how he ended up getting press-ganged into Oliver's employ due to admiring the flowers on Oliver's property, as well as his supports with Largo, and as well as his support conversations with Largo, and of course how he made his grand return in Radiant Dawn as Danved. Yeah, he's obviously quite the buffoon. And this is honestly this is more so a reference to minstrel shows. And which, back during that time, were mostly there for comedy, but especially when it comes down to... However, it takes a darker turn, as most people would essentially showcase black people most people, mainly whites, would showcase black people in a less than flattering portrayal. Yeah. Let's just say it was it was basically racist. That being said, at least we got some better representation in with Fire Emblem Awakening. And they basically made early appearances around Chapter 3 or Chapter 4. Those being the East and West Khans of Plegia, the East and West Khans of Regna Ferox, Flavia, and Basilio. And yes, Flavia is black. She's not dark-skinned, but she's black. But even with that, both are still kind of notable, as they're basically the Goto archetype. As not only are they pre-promoted units, but they're both fairly powerful units as well, especially with the fact that they serve a sort of mentor position towards Crom and the rest of the shepherds, which is pretty cool. Plus, Basilio basically looks like Fire Emblem's answer to Nick Fury from the Avengers. And it's mostly the bald head and the eye patch. Only difference, Nick Fury is in the Avengers franchise is played by Samuel L. Jackson, and Basilio's voiced by the legendary Patrick Seitz. So there's some differences. Moving on to Fates, and there's not that much black representation. I mean, honestly, in all fairness, I've heard mentioned that Niles may be black, but I highly doubt that. Especially when you consider that his daughter Nina is white. So, that all signs basically points to no. And if I knew how to add this, I would basically kind of play a little snippet of Gayer European from Legally Blonde, the musical, because that's also brought up with Niles as well, but I don't have that, so just take my word. Anyway, we wouldn't get, that being said, even with it skipping, we wouldn't get more black representation until Three Houses, which gave us 4 characters that can be considered as black. Those being the leader of the Golden Deer House, Claude, Cyril, the Princess of Brigid, Petra, and the Dew. So basically, each pathway gives us a notable black character. That being said, considering how the Almirans basically seem to be based on either Middle Eastern or dare I say, Arabic culture, it's kind of obvious that both Claude and Cyril, and considering how both Claude and Cyril are Almirans, there's a good chance they could more or less be considered Arabic or Middle Eastern in designation, but more often than not, both have been mentioned, both can easily be considered as black as well, so there's that. And as for Petra, well, there's no doubt that she's black, as many people also consider her as such. Brigid also seems to be based on Celtic Ireland. The Kingdom of Brigid also seems to be based on Celtic Ireland. And, well, in certain aspects, there have been some dark-skinned Celts in the past, which I guess one could also say that the Celts could be considered as black. And then there's the Dew, who is basically just, there's no doubt in anyone's mind that he's black. And considering how he's in the Blue Lions, yeah, it really does say a lot. That being said, this just leads us to Fire Emblem Engage, which gives us the Queendom of Soul. And while certain characters aren't exactly black, the royal family of Soul are. And consisting of Tamara, Fogado, and Queen Sephoria. And basically they're just your standard black family, which is kind of interesting to say the least. And surprisingly enough even further, There's Sapphira, one of the Brodian royal guards, who is also black and 35 years old. Yeah, I was surprised too. Yeah. This will be continued in part 4.